here we go.
So, Rick,
I've been drafted. Actually, we both preached this morning.
both preached. And my mic is not on, but it is on now, yes.
There we go.
And yes, we both preached this morning.
Just leave his mic off.
That's right. Yes.
It's not going to be twice as long.
Oh,
No,
well,
no.
something less than 35 minutes. Okay, something less. But yeah, you preached here in the church, and I preached over in the gathering,
right.
both at 10 o'clock. And so we thought, since we preached on the same thing, we might have a little more to share with you this way. So you get...
That's his way of saying we had a different approach to the same lesson. And I'm actually grateful that you read the collect. You know, Bob said, sometimes people said, here ends the reading of the wrong. It was the right prayer. So,
It's all good.
and I actually started my sermon this morning using that prayer because where it says, "O God, from whom all good proceeds." How many people were in church last week? Even remember? Remember who preached?
Fred.
And it was
And
good.
it was good.
Thank you. I was gonna say, what did Fred talk about? Fred talked about that it was good.
Yeah.
And that's confirmed right here. O God, from whom all good proceeds.
Yes.
But then it says, grant that by your inspiration we may think those things that are right, and by your merciful guiding may do them. Good is easy. Doing right, that takes some elbow grease. That's a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
And that collect for me led me into looking at the gospel lesson where Jesus is calling Matthew. Now, we know from having heard these readings for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, we know tax collectors and sinners, they go hand in hand, right?
Still today?
Still today.
Okay,
That's right.
okay,
That's right. I
okay,
mean, it's a good.
okay.
And they had a party together, right? It says as soon as he called them, they're having a party. Tax collectors and sinners. Pharisees are on the outside, not liking what's going on in there. I'm here to tell you, if you want to have a good party, go with the tax collectors and the sinners. Forget the Pharisees. They do not know how to have a good time. The thing about the tax collectors, though, is that we don't have an understanding of what a tax collector is. We think about the IRS, whole different thing. There's multiple reasons why tax collectors are not good. Well, they're maybe good, but they're not doing what's right. Okay? And I got to thinking, what is the equivalent of a tax collector, a first century tax collector today? Because what they did, they collected taxes on behalf of the Roman government, okay? They were hired by somebody who was hired by somebody who was hired by the Roman government to tax everything. And they skimmed, not just a little, but a lot off the top, okay? So essentially they were traitors because they were helping people fund their own oppression. So they weren't much liked by the people in their midst.
It wasn't like our good social services today.
No, nothing like that.
Okay.
Nothing
Okay.
like that. And I thought, they were kind of like unscrupulous political appointees. And I bet when you think about political appointees, you could come up with a whole list of people that you'd just rather not go to the party with. Now, I don't want us to think about those folks today, because the folks that you would come up with on this side would be a whole different list of people than what you would. And that describes the problem we have in America right now. So let's drift back a few years. 51 years ago, right about now, there was a little thing in Washington called Watergate. Anybody remember Watergate?
Yeah, I think we're here.
And a whole bunch of people got into big trouble. Conspiracy and fraud and all sorts of mean, bad things were happening. And they were kind of they weren't good people. Huh? They were good people.
Oh, yeah.
They just had not done the right thing. One of them, and I just want to highlight him, because he's like Matthew, was a guy named Jeb Magruder. Heard that name? Mm-hmm. Well, Jeb was the assistant director of the committee to re-elect the president. And he got into bad trouble. Spent almost a year in federal penitentiary, got out, tried to resume his life, and did pretty well. Anybody know what happened to him? He went to Princeton Seminary, theological seminary, got himself a Master of Divinity degree, and was ordained in the Presbyterian Church. So, like Matthew, just like Matthew, when Jesus said, "Follow me," he did. That's just a reminder to us that no matter what kind of trouble we might get into, no matter how bad we are, when God calls us, when we choose to follow, our life changes.
It can be a new way.
It can be a new way.
Yeah, and it's also helpful, I think, Rick, to remember that in this gospel lesson, it seemed crowded, didn't it? You get 3 different stories that are all tied together. There's Matthew, the call of the tax collector, but there's also the woman who has been hemorrhaging for 12 years, who reaches out and touches Jesus' cloak. And there's the third, which is the official, the synagogue person, who comes and asks him to go and heal his daughter, who is dying or is dead, right?
Right.
And in all 3 of them, there's a reason why those 3 stories are here together, which is that every single one of them is actually dealing with the same issue, and Jesus actually violates the law in all 3 cases. It isn't that the Pharisees just didn't like tax collectors. It was also because they were disobeying the law by cheating and by extorting, and so they were violating the law. So therefore, they were considered unclean or impure, and therefore the law would say, don't have any association, don't get involved with those who are unclean, because you'll get unclean, because it's like disease. If Shally has some virus and I go touch Shally, what happens is I get the virus, right? And evil and sin was considered to be a contagious sort of condition in Jesus' time, and therefore the tax collector, you don't want to hang around and hit them. Some of you may have had mothers who told you don't mess around with the pigs because you'll get dirty, right? And there was a hidden message in there, right? And also the second one, the woman with the hemorrhage, she is ill and she's sick. And if you touch the woman, then you will catch that illness as well. And so she is unclean, and therefore, according to the purity laws, you shouldn't have any association with her. That's why she says, if I just touch his cloak, I won't get close enough to touch him. I'll just touch his cloak, and that might be enough. But the very contact that he has, and then he turns around and honors her by saying, your faith has made you well, is actually violating the purity laws, because the concern is he will become unclean, impure by his contact, by his relationship with her. Then the third one with the girl, one of the worst things that somebody can do who is trying to stay ritually pure and clean is be in the contact of someone who is dead. And so when he goes into the room, when the synagogue official asks him, the synagogue official knows, I'm putting him at risk. But Jesus doesn't seem to worry about that too much. And what we see in this passage is Jesus is reversing the law. The law says if you are involved with an unclean person, you catch what is unclean. Jesus says it's just the reverse. When I'm in touch with an unclean person, they catch my cleanness and they become healed. And so he sets a whole different example for us, that God says, no longer will I want you to stay away from the people who are unclean. I want you to be with them and bring healing.
Right.
So it's really interesting that those 3, which seem disconnected, actually are all 3 making the same point. Who am I going to have contact with? And that's why the tax collector and sinners. Right. There's been a long history in the church as well of wanting to stay clean. And some of it is stuff that we understand, isn't it?
Right.
Isn't it more comfortable to be around people that you know are right?
It may,
The
although
parties are not as good, I heard
although
you.
not nearly as much fun.
Okay.
You know, I was thinking about that too, that the fact that, whereas people were concerned about, well, you could catch this stuff.
Right.
I mean, this
I become unclean.
uncleanness. What I found is really interesting, because of Jesus' association with one group, it actually opened up the possibilities for him to be in the company of all the other people,
Yes.
like the woman who followed him along the way, like the man whose daughter had died. He wouldn't go to the Pharisees and ask
Right.
them, because he knows they wouldn't show up at his house
Right.
because she's dead. They would be no help whatsoever.
Right.
Thankfully, the church has changed. People actually call when they need help these days, and we don't go, hopefully, stay away from me because there's something wrong with you.
Right.
Sometimes that
Yes.
happens.
Yes, it has been. So it's one of those things that we're always trying to work at. How do we live like Jesus? Because his call to follow isn't just to walk the steps, as you said.
Right.
It's really to live a life like what he lived. And therefore, our job is to be involved with everybody in the world, no matter who they are, even if they are sometimes a little uncomfortable. When I was in Alabama, I used to go to local churches, and I went to a Pentecostal church one time, Assemblies of God, and it was a little too wild for me, but then I started to make friends there, and it was kind of fun to go there. And then my friend down at the AME church invited me to come preach at the Bethel AME church, and I was the only white person in the whole congregation. And when I walked in, I thought, oh my goodness. Now, and I know L.C. Green, my friend, I knew how he preached, and I knew I can't quite do that, And they may kick me out halfway into the sermon. But it turned out,
But
they didn't. They let me stay, which was good, and they became friends. But I had to be willing to get out of the comfort zone,
Right.
to walk in there. And that's part of this lesson, that we can't always stay just with people with whom we're comfortable or who provide less risk.
Right.
Because actually then we're not actually doing the work of the gospel, right?
I was thinking that it's a wonderful thing to want to think to do right
Right.
and to do what's right, but boy, isn't it a fine line between doing what's right and becoming overly righteous
Yes.
or self-righteous? You know some
Yep.
people like that?
Right.
Yeah?
Right.
That to do the right thing, you can then begin to believe your own press of
Yeah.
how righteous you are, and you start then being critical of everybody else who's not quite up to your standards.
Yeah. There's a story about a guy who was hit rock bottom. Everything was going wrong in his life. He said, I know what I've got to do. I've got to go to church. He'd never been to this church in town before, but he walked down the block, went into church, and the worship was pretty good. The choir was pretty good. The preaching wasn't bad. And when he left, he said, this is probably a pretty nice place. I'll probably try it again. But as he was his way out the end, the usher said, next week, why don't you find some pants without the stains?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
You gotta be careful.
that week he was thinking about, well, what should I wear? And he prayed to God, God, tell me, what should I wear to go inside that church again? And God said, what the hell do you think I know? I've never gotten inside the front door.
Right.
Bad. Okay. But yeah, go ahead.
Have you ever felt like maybe some good, righteous people maybe didn't quite think that you were good enough? Maybe something had happened in your life, and that, thinking back, I told this morning. 40 years ago, I was serving as an ordained person in another denomination. Okay, and at that time, I had recently gone through a divorce, and I was well on my way of becoming a full-blown alcoholic. Okay? One of my superiors came to me and said, you're no longer a marketable commodity. Don't ever say that to somebody. Even if it's true, it hurts.
All right. Yep.
I say that because my experience as I encountered the Episcopal Church is I was accepted, okay? In spite of all the things that I was doing to myself, things that had happened to me. And I was cared for, and I was loved back into health and wholeness. And eventually I was ordained in that church. Ellen decided to put up with me, and we got married, and everything turned out more than all right. But you know, it's so easy for us to look at somebody else and see the stains on
That's
their
right.
hands.
Well,
Or to see the
Yeah.
behavior that they're engaged in. And rather than love them
Draw a line.
as Jesus did,
Right.
we stand outside and over and against and be critical of them.
Yeah, yeah. There's a story about Tony Campolo. He tells a story on himself that he's a famous Baptist preacher. And he was at a church conference in Hawaii, where you've lived. And it was the time change and everything else. He just couldn't sleep at all his second night there. And so he walked down at 3 a.m. in the morning to the coffee shop that was on the street below the hotel. And as he walks in there, he's just, trying to get something going in his head, and he's sitting there. And right after 3 o'clock, the door swings wide open, and in walk a bunch of women, loud and boisterous as can be. And as they start talking, he gets the point that this is a group of ladies of the street that were finishing their shift. And they have this loud conversation going on right in the bench right next to Tony, and he's thinking, maybe I should be going on. I'm not sure I'm getting any rest this way. And as he does that, one of the women in the bench says, you know what, tomorrow night's my birthday. And the other women say, so what? You expect us to throw you a party? And she says, no, I'm 39. I've never had a party. I don't expect them to start now. And they go on talking. They talk for a little while. Campolo's listening to the conversation. Eventually, they all go out to go home. Campolo goes over to the cook who's behind the counter, and he says, do they come in regularly? Do you know who these women are? And he says, oh, yeah, that's Agnes and her group. Agnes is the one who was talking, and she comes in. That whole group comes in every night right at 3 o'clock. And Campolo says, you heard her talk about the birthday. Was it possible that's really her birthday tomorrow? And he said, well, I suppose so. I don't know her that well, but I suppose. Well, Campolo says, well, I've got an idea. 24 hours later, he walks in about 2:30 in the morning, and at 2:30 in the morning, the place is full. Absolutely every seat in every place, every booth is full with street people and hookers. The chef has gone out and recruited and let everybody know there's going to be a birthday party at 3 o'clock. Come. Campolo comes with a great big cake. Happy birthday, Agnes. And 3 o'clock, when Agnes and her friends walk in the door, immediately everybody starts saying, happy birthday to you. And she gets in and realizes they're singing to her, and she just starts bawling. The tears start coming. And they finish the song, and then the chef says, okay, Agnes, and he hands her the knife, cut the cake, and she says, can I just look at it for a little bit? Could I take it back to my room? I've never had a cake. And of course, the answer was yes. And she takes the cake, goes out the room, and then the whole place is silent. And Campolo is sitting there thinking, now what do I do? And so he says, I know what to do. Let's pray. And he makes all the street people and the hookers and everybody hold hands, and he starts to pray. And he prays for Agnes, that God will bless her, that God will keep her safe, that God will allow her to see the joy and the love that was expressed that night as a sign that God loves her too. And when he finishes the prayer, he says, that felt pretty good, except that the chef is pretty annoyed. And the chef, the cook, comes over and says, you never told me you were a preacher. And what kind of church are you from anyway? There's no church that shows up at 3 a.m. He says, actually, I'm from the kind of church that throws birthday parties for hookers at 3 a.m. in the morning. The cook says, nah, there's no such church. If there were a church like that, I would have to join it. Let's us be that kind of church.
Amen. Be good and do right.
Please stand, and we'll continue with the